right, we are now live streaming. Good evening and welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. Thank you for joining us tonight. If you haven't joined us before, The Breakdown is a monthly web series that focuses on everything housing here in Santa Fe and across the great state of New Mexico. Don't forget to visit our YouTube channel and like, subscribe, and share tonight's episode. I'll be sharing some links at the end of the episode, so stay tuned. My name is Michael Barrio, and I'm the Executive Director for the Santa Fe Housing Action Coalition. And if you haven't heard of us, we are a broad coalition of community partners and stakeholders that are focused on creating and ensuring an equitable and accessible housing landscape for all Santa Feans. What that means is that we focus on research, technical expertise, community education, and advocacy for better policy. That's what we do, and that's my day job. I'm also your host. Tonight's episode is about the absolute crap load of misinformation, myths, and misconceptions surrounding affordable housing. For me, tonight's episode is super important because there are so many of us that are genuinely concerned with the state of affordable housing in our communities, the impact it has on our families, economies, and how it shapes the literal landscape of the cities many of us call or would like to call home. But the thing is, housing is such a huge and complicated issue. It's an issue that's intertwined with workforce development, sustainability, economic development, climate resilience, infrastructure, health and education outcomes. It's such a huge issue that most people don't have a clear understanding of what it takes to develop, create, and build affordable housing. And so what ends up happening is that a lot of people that actually do want to see the affordability issue addressed are actually contributing to the misinformation that's out there. And again, this is all because most of us just don't understand how all of this works. And we shouldn't, right? Most of us are concerned with our jobs. Putting food on our families' tables and that kind of thing, right? But so partly because of us not understanding how it works, there have been a series of myths and misconceptions about affordable housing for a long, long time that have often prevented us from addressing the housing crisis as effectively, as efficiently as we could. Over and over again, people show up to city council meetings or legislative hearings to oppose affordable housing developments, armed with worries about increased crime, deadly traffic, plummeting property value. And the thing is, a lot of the time these arguments win. Not because they're true, but because they sound true and because they create emotional and reactive responses. I think it's also worth noting that the more informed our communities are about the issues that impact them, their lives and the lives of their families, and how to participate in public and decision-making processes, the easier it is to combat misinformation and the crisis it's helped create. You know, again, at nearly every city council meeting, the majority voice in those rooms are usually the wealthy and securely housed. The people that are actually negatively impacted by the lack of affordable housing stock and development and that can actually benefit from that rarely are in those rooms. And when they are, they're almost always outnumbered. So I guess this is kind of my gentle reminder to learn to ask questions, just to learn to participate in the processes that shape our communities. And it's also an invitation to connect with us at the coalition for more information. Cool? Cool. All right, we're here tonight to meet and dispel some myths and misconceptions head on and hopefully help folks get a little more clarity around the housing issue and what the real threats are. So with that, I'd like to introduce my panel for tonight's episode. Tonight, I've got Anthony Guida, President, Friends of Architecture, welcome. Kyle Harwood, Partner at Egolf, Ferlic, Martinez, and Harwood. Joseph Montoya, who I hope will be on soon, Executive Director for the Santa Fe County Housing Authority. Kate Noble, Board President for Santa Fe Public Schools, Board of Education, District 3. And Jesse Roach, Director, City of Santa Fe Water. Thank you all for being here and welcome. And just really quickly, I want to give a quick shout out to Brenda McKenna, who I believe is in the audience tonight or will be very shortly. Brenda is the New Mexico field rep for Congresswoman Melanie Stansbury, and also to Xochitl Campos Biggs, District Director, and AJ Pacheco, field rep, both from the office of Congresswoman Teresa Leger Fernandez. So thank you both so much, all of you so much for being here. And I hope that you'll all chime in. So, okay, let's jump right in. There's a lot of folks that believe that affordable housing is kind of only for low-income individuals and families, that it drives down property values, looks undesirable and, cookie cutter, hurts local schools, and it's too expensive to build. The list goes on, and we'll get to that. I guess what really gets me about these myths is that they're so pervasive and they've been around for so long that people have just kind of accepted them without any basis in fact, right? They sound so believable, and so they've essentially been weaponized to derail or altogether prevent affordable housing developments in communities across the country, much less New Mexico. And this is a problem. It's a problem when even the people who affordable housing could benefit begin to believe the misinformation. It's a problem because these myths and misconceptions keep us from really addressing the housing crisis we're facing in communities all across the state. And now more than ever, we need to make sure that communities understand how these things work. So let's talk about the myths. First myth, affordable housing hurts the quality of local schools and lowers standardized test scores. So the reality here, and I'm going to let Kate talk about this because she's the expert, is this is just nonsense, right? The opposite, I think, is actually true. Without affordable housing, many families, become trapped in a cycle of rising rents, which we are all familiar with, and have to move pretty frequently, right, to find spaces that they can afford to live in. And that means that your kid can't stay in the same school for very long, right? And that results in lower test scores on standardized tests, which I guess that's a whole other issue. And from what I understand, when kids have a stable home and can stay in a single school system, their test scores rise. I mean, they're able to build long-term relationships with other kids, teachers. Kate, what are you seeing? What's your view on the link between affordable housing or secure housing, right, and educational outcomes?
Well, I think you have touched upon some really important issues for families, and they're really both the family side of things and then there's the educator side of things, because quality schools really depend on teachers, good teachers in the classroom. And that is a critical issue for affordable housing because frankly, teachers are not paid enough and really need places to live as well. And if you can't have local teachers who are from the community, engaged in the community, that is probably the primary thing that will decrease the quality of schools, because teachers are the ones, they're where the rubber meets the road for local schools. So that's just an absolutely critical issue. For families, what you touched upon, Michael, are exactly some of the right things. We know that school is really secondary to family and child stability because there's a hierarchy of needs, as we know, for every human. And young kids who have stable homes, who have families that are less stressed about their housing situation and less inclined to blow ups or whatever it may be. Stressed houses lead to stressed kids. Children are really just the end of all of the things that are going on in a household and in society, and they manifest that in their behaviors and in their lives. So when we have families and children who are stable, they are absolutely more inclined to do better in school. And then we can move on to things like nutrition and food security. But all of this, as we've seen in lots of good studies and science throughout time, really does tie back to that hierarchy of needs for children, and achievements have to do with that stability. And again, teachers who are rooted in a community, who understand the identity and cultural context of their students. We have a lot of science around that being critical factors for student successes and engagement in schools. So these things are all related, but we have to have housing that teachers and families can afford in communities in order to add to the achievement picture. Plus, one of the things a lot of us know is very often people who are younger have children. It's some of us, particularly women, have these biological clock things that happen, and that is often when families are earning less. They're still working, they're still in the trajectory of careers, and we had a study that ties families' income to where they can afford to live. And it's not surprising that when you have younger children, the income, stability can be a little bit lower. And that adds to diversity. And there's really an important piece, because schools, when they're really good, not only have stable families, rooted community educators in neighborhoods, in communities, teachers who are a part of that and engaged and committed, but they're also more diverse and distributed throughout communities. So when we get to NIMBYism and you can have kids in one neighborhood and not in another, that's just not good for anybody. But when we have a diversity of all sorts of things, but including incomes, that's when schools and societies really thrive, because like many things, education is strengthened by a diversity of ideas, viewpoints, and lived experiences. And when we get the integration of neighborhoods, we get stronger schools. And really the most important point is that schools and educators are a reflection of the community that they're in. And when that is strong, diverse, and stable for families, everything improves. And test scores are just test scores. They're not a reflection of anything but that moment and that stability and community strength. So affordable housing where people can feel secure and live, is just critically important to the whole picture that it's reflected in schools.
Exactly. And I want to kind of go to this point you made about, how important it is to have the teachers, the educators, be rooted, right, in their communities, because that's what they do, and being a part of those communities is essential to providing the kind of education that I think that the schools that serve particular communities need to have, right? Those are valuable perspectives. There's lived experiences. It's hard to have that when your educators probably can't afford to live in the city that they work in, right? And I think that this is probably something that people don't maybe think about, but the people that I would call the real infrastructure of a community or a city, like educators or nurses and firefighters and that sort of thing. These are also the type of people that can't afford to live in within a lot of our cities, because they can't afford to do it on those incomes. And so, yeah, the impact of having your educators not even be able to really live in the communities that they teach in, that just seems like it would have a profound impact, and that doesn't really take a lot of it seems like common sense, but
it's so big.
Yeah. So can we say that, well, I want to go to the rest of the panel and see if you guys have anything you want to chime in about the education aspect. If you've heard anything about it. All right.
I can tell you, I've been hearing increasingly, because as I think we all probably know here, we are seeing spikes in housing prices, rent prices in Santa Fe. And I'm hearing increasingly from teachers that they just can't afford to live here, and they're devastated. There are people who have been renting for years, and their landlord has decided to sell. We're seeing an acceleration of the cycle with rising prices for housing, and it is impacting our educators more and more. And there's just heartbreaking stories of teachers who say, you know, I don't want to leave this community. And if I do, I may have to, because then commuting brings other expenses. But, you know, we're talking about losing teachers to other districts where they can afford to live,
Right.
because everybody needs to hire teachers and the wages aren't that different throughout the state. So Santa
Right.
Fe really suffering, and the trend is unfortunately accelerating.
Yeah. So I guess we could say, one, that affordable housing actually helps local schools, right? And educational outcomes. And
Absolutely.
two, I think we can say that this myth has been busted. So thank you, Kate. That's amazing. So I want to go to this next myth, and unfortunately, so okay, first the myth is that affordable housing brings increased crime. And so first of all, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of stuff to pull these shows and panels together. You know, you're like dealing with schedules and all that stuff. So I wasn't able to have a crime expert join us tonight, but I think we can manage. I'll take a stab, you know, because I do research and stuff. There are no studies that show affordable housing brings crime to neighborhoods. I just want to say that to start. In fact, families who own their own homes add stability to a neighborhood and lower the crime rate. Home ownership increases neighborhood cohesion and encourages cooperation in ridding communities of criminal activity. That's just how it works. So families who live in affordable housing seek the same thing every family does, surprise, surprise, a safe place to raise their children and the opportunity to enhance the value of what they own. You know, we're all kind of looking for the same thing. And I just want to say that analyzing the effects of affordable housing makes total sense to me, because I mean, just considering what Americans spend on these programs alone, I mean, each year, US, federal, state, and local governments drop more than $97 billion on housing assistance. That's a lot of money. One of those programs, the low-income housing tax credit, which provides developer incentives to build affordable housing, it was launched in 1986. And since then, the program has funded about a fifth of multifamily developments. So that's that. Anyway, I did a lot of looking around for studies that examined or looked for links between affordable housing and crime. And unsurprisingly, I couldn't find anything that made that link. But I also came across a really interesting paper that I would highly recommend. It offers a mixed method analysis of municipal level consequences of an affordable housing development that was built in a New Jersey suburb called Mount Laurel. So opponents of affordable housing development often suggest that creating affordable housing will harm the surrounding communities. And again, the feared consequences include increases in crime, declining property values, rising taxes. And so to evaluate those claims, the paper uses the case of Mount Laurel, New Jersey, which was actually the site of a landmark affordable housing legal case and subsequent affordable housing development. The paper compares crime rates, property values, and property taxes there in Mount Laurel to outcomes in similar nearby municipalities that didn't have similar affordable housing developments. And so ultimately, the researchers found that the opening of the affordable housing development was not associated with trends in crime, property values, or taxes. And they even went so far as to discuss management practices and design features that might have mitigated potential negative factors. So that's just one study. But I know that people hear about this all the time. Are you guys hearing about crime rising or spiking because of affordable housing? Is that something you hear about?
I mean, Michael, I'll chime in. You know, my perception is that, you know, after 70 years of a suburban experiment in the United States, you know, low-rise development, single-family residential zoning, you know, I'm just going to call it for what it is. I mean, I think this is one of the racist myths of housing that are the result of our housing patterns for 70 years. that if we're used to this idea that, everybody around us or who lives in our neighborhood is like us at the same socioeconomic level and that has, the same relative income, this is what people have gotten used to. And oftentimes, any proposal to increase density, to do multifamily housing is met with this idea that, well, that increased density or rental housing or lower income or mixed income produces crime in our neighborhood. These are folks that don't look like us, that don't have the same income as us, and so on and so forth. And it's a kind of vile red herring, I think, in housing. I mean, if we drill down a little bit deeper, I mean, right beyond the data that you show, it's clear that, yes, everybody does want the same thing, and certainly home ownership and creating more direct paths to home ownership create that level of investment in the neighborhood, and so that's kind of a no-brainer. I think
Right.
I think where things start to fall apart is maybe and I'm an architect and very interested in these things. I was interested in Los Angeles, where we lived for many years before, and now in Santa Fe. I think when you go to the design question, the devil is really in the details, right? If we say, okay, well, let's move past home ownership, let's talk about rental housing. If we create large super block, affordable housing developments, those are the things that really kind of get people's hackles up, and they start to kind of react this way, even if the data is not true. But I think that we also want to create places where people want to live, right? And
Right.
people and know their neighborhoods and have kind of diverse community. And so it is a matter of design, like how do we insert density into existing neighborhood fabrics? How do we change neighborhoods that are kind of completely monolithic in single family zoning? How do we create those opportunities? Scale is important. I think the design of the housing is really important.
Mhm.
I think this kind of notion of how do we integrate with schools is really important. I think that's how we get there.
And so like it's just like it's such common sense, it seems like. I mean, nobody wants crime in their neighborhood, right? So I mean, it gets back to this idea of people that need affordable housing. They want the same things that anyone wants, in the places that they live. They want it to be safe. They want it to be accessible. They want it to be a place that they can find community. I mean, those are, so I mean, even without all the studies, I feel like just common sense should have prevailed at some point. But this, again, like speaking back to what you were saying about, this kind of, there's this racist element to it. This narrative, it has a long history and has worked really well to, again, derail and sometimes altogether kill affordable projects. And that's really unfortunate because, again, things can sound true and be very, very influential when it comes to policy making, right? So anyway, any other thoughts on the crime myth?
Yeah, if I may.
Yeah.
One of the things that's important, not only does that kind of narrative have affected residential development, the design of residential development locally, and by local I mean nationwide, but that's actually also affected federal policy, right? And so these kind of myths actually get to national scale politicians in terms of what is it we're going to fund, how we're going to fund it. And I can't tell you the number of programs that were actually good, well-intentioned programs from 1964 on and after the Fair Housing Act that just were either disappeared or completely were not allowed to grow anymore, or simply were just defunded simply
Right.
because of these kind of myths. And specifically one of those myths is the high crime rate relative to affordable housing. And I think we have to say that affordable housing there's a gambit of income ranges, a gambit of people who are in that affordable housing, and a gambit of folks. So it's a very big picture, right? And one could also make the case that affordable housing is it should be affordable to everyone, right? So a millionaire's house is affordable to him. So When we start providing branding over what affordable housing is, and we look at examples that were created in the 60s in terms of high concentrations of very low income, and then we think that all of a sudden that's affordable housing, that's a problem in itself.
Yeah. Thank you, Joseph. By the way, everyone, that's Joseph Montoya.
I'm not in two places at once.
Yeah.
Michael, I'll add something to this, and this is just one thing that has really stuck with me for many years. One of my heroes in Los Angeles is an architect named Angela Brooks and Brooks Scarpa, and Angie's great on the sustainability front, doing kind of very sustainable buildings, but she also in her practice does a tremendous amount of affordable housing and projects in Los Angeles for people experiencing homelessness. LA is one of the toughest regulatory environments for doing these types of projects, both in terms of land costs and in terms of public process for reviewing these things. A couple of years ago, she gave a lecture at the UNM School of Architecture, and she presented this body of work, all of these projects that her firm had done in Los Angeles to date. And of course, they're sustainable, they're incredibly beautiful, but she talked entirely about the folks who live in these buildings and the process that she went through for about 90 minutes. And when the lecture was over, a student stood up and said, you haven't talked about how beautiful your work is. And what's the role of design in what you're doing here? And she very, very matter-of-factly just said, well, we do good design because that gives the people who come out with the pitchforks one less thing to complain about. And if they can't complain about, like, it doesn't look good, or it's too tall, or it's not pretty, or whatever, then really the next step is like, I don't want those people living in my neighborhood. And that's really what we're talking about here. So I mean, it's design has a role, and she kind of pointed to the really right place for this, but it's a tool for combating this myth, this attitude that is pervasive everywhere.
Well, I think design even plays a greater role than that in terms of overcoming the hill of negativity from that standpoint, because all of a sudden, one of these issues is about, it's poor quality or it's not designed well. But design in itself, right, it lifts the human spirit, right? And so when you're living in a well-designed place and you have a place that provides a sense of community, that you have a place that actually provides aspirational qualities to you, that alone, right, it could provide a better environment than lots of other places, which are just ticky-tack, homes that all look the same, right? And so in those senses, I think especially there's so many examples of multifamily developments that do exactly that. And so design shouldn't be used just because to take away a negative. It's an incredible positive for the people who are living there. And that alone, right? You may have a lower income, but if you're becoming a better person for whatever reason, in different ways, in different manners, it's because of that design and the relationship with those designs, I think that's incredibly important.
Yeah.
And just to say, for anybody who needs more introduction of Joseph Montoya, he is an affordable housing expert. Some might even say a godfather of affordable housing, certainly in Santa Fe and maybe all of New Mexico. But and the point he made about the bias at the federal level, I think, is really important, and it does extend to neighborhood levels. And I know a story of a little subdivision, and there was one affordable home, and the residents there kind of got together and frankly ganged up on the affordable home about their fencing and sort of mandating it be a certain way. And honestly, in this particular story, I think it really was racist. There really was bias embedded there. And, dispelling this myth is really, really important. And I love the points about design because it does create pride and joy and all of these sort of fundamental human things. Plus, there's all of that urban thinking around eyes on the streets and not having dark areas. And all of that can really feed into a virtuous cycle. We hope to bust this myth, but also to really uplift the humans who live in these homes.
Exactly. And I'm excited that everyone has a lot to say about design because we're going to come to that. Okay, so the crime myth, busted. Okay, next myth. So for a little bit, I'm gonna talk specifically about Santa Fe because this myth comes up all the time, like all the time, all the time. So here it is. We can't build more housing, affordable or otherwise, because we don't have enough water to support it. Okay, so the reality, I think, right? And I have two people on that are going to correct me if I'm wrong. But so this is an argument that's used in other parts of the state, obviously, in other part of the country too. But this one seriously comes up all the time as a huge concern in Santa Fe. So as far as I know, and again, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, Kyle and Jesse, Santa Fe uses less water today than it did as a city in 1994, despite massive growth during that time. So, I mean, is water a limiting factor for housing growth right now?
No. And we can stop
You
there.
can stop there, actually.
We can stop there.
Like, I'm going to soundbite that, and then I'm just going to play that on loop. Post it everywhere.
You know, one of the things you said to open up that resonated was these myths are things that sound true and they create an emotional response. And I think that really accurately describes water in Santa Fe. And I don't fault anybody who moves here or who has grown up here for recognizing that we live in a dry place where water is incredibly valuable, and looks around and sees growth and comes to the immediate, what seems to them logical conclusion that there's not enough water for us to continue to grow. And that if there's something that limits growth here, and I think there's a piece there where people would like there to be something that limits growth. Once they're here, what's the hammer? What's the thing that limits growth? Then it must be water, right? We live in the desert. We are very fortunate to, as a community, as a city, to benefit from forward thinkers back for, at least 30 years. And what you said is correct. In 1995, compared to what the water that we used in 1995, in the last 25 years, we have added 25% to the population served, and we have reduced the total water use at the same time by 33%. So if you do the math and kind of average it out per person, basically everybody has cut their water use in half. That's half the story. Incredible conservation success in the last 25 years. And for those of you who think that public entities don't do a good job and that the private sector could do a better job, this was actually an absolutely opposite of what happened in Santa Fe. The water was a company. The Sangre de Cristo Water Company was a subsidiary of PNM until it was bought by the city in 1995. And since 1995, two things have happened that show incredible leadership, incredible foresight, incredible vision. And those are the conservation that I just mentioned, and also moving our water use portfolio from groundwater to surface water, and bringing the BDD, the Buckman Directive version, online in 2011. Kyle is one of the giants upon whose shoulders I'm standing. He played a big part in that. And I will just say that in the last 5 years, 80% of our water use comes from treating river water, either from the Santa Fe River or from the Rio Grande. And the important part about that is that we're not pumping our wells as much, and our well fields are recovering. And we think of our well fields as our savings account, and they are recovering. The final piece before I let Kyle in here is at this point, that river water resource essentially supports the majority. It could potentially support all of our water use. And we are continuing to grow, and we have a mechanism that essentially allows us to grow into our Buckman well field. That capacity is there, but ultimately we would like to continue to grow into river water. And so the next piece we're working on is a return flow project to allow us to start to capture some of the effluent that arrives at our wastewater treatment plant and get it, in this case, indirectly back into our drinking water system. So myth busted. The city water division does not, we do not create growth policy. We provide a safe, reliable, and resilient water supply to meet Santa Fe's needs. But at the moment, we have room for growth.
Thank you, Jesse. And real quick before Kyle jumps in, for those of you that may, I don't know, maybe not trust people that work for the city, I don't know. Kyle does not work for the city, but he knows a heck of a lot about this issue, as Jesse pointed out. So Kyle, why don't you go ahead and jump right in?
Well, thank you. I'm a little nervous that Jesse is taller and thinner than me. So if he's standing on my shoulders, that's gonna make me even shorter and rounder than I am. But yeah, we've had a very progressive, I think Santa Fe has really cut a very progressive angle through the sort of growth and development and affordable housing story in northern New Mexico. And I want to just warn you all, in a moment, I'm going to take us outside of the city of Santa Fe, because everything that Jesse just said about the city and the city-county combined water system is true. And and Santa Feans should be incredibly proud of what's happened. But as you were just talking about how as more and more pressure in the city is pushing folks out, I think for this conversation, it'd be useful to look at the larger landscape outside of these municipal systems. But just to speak to or to emphasize what Jesse said, the publification of the city water system back in the mid-90s was a direct reach for the local folks to control water rates, water policy, and how to balance the water supplies that Jesse talked about. This resilience of balancing ground and surface water has been so critical, and this community has invested so much, both in the infrastructure to produce a reliable and safe water supply, but also in that conservation that is really unparalleled anywhere else in New Mexico, or I think in the country. So those are all very important things. I want to just remind everyone, because I think it's a really fascinating chapter of the water system development as it relates to housing. There was a pretty extreme drought in '99 and then again in 2002, and it drove a policy for the city to require new development to bring some of the water resources necessary to support that new growth, which of course has in part provided some affordable housing as well as a lot of the other growth that is not affordable housing. And that obligation to first do toilet retrofits, where we hardwired conservation in the city water system and use that freed up savings for new construction. And then that was succeeded by the water rate transfer requirement. And one of the little vignettes within this bigger story that I think is really fascinating, and this is a credit to Rebecca Wurtzberger, who I see as an attendee because she was a city councilor at the time and a real leader on this, was that for the portion of the affordable housing water budget for the new development, the city did not require developers to bring water for that part of the housing stock. And the city contributed the water. So there was a carrot and a stick. There was a carrot requiring developers to bring this water right or this conservation offset. But then in order to mitigate the burden on the developer for that part of the affordable housing, because that was a huge debate at those times, the city said, well, we the city will provide the water for the affordable housing component of your housing project. And I just think that is I don't know what other folks on this panel think, but I feel like that was a really very sophisticated way of trying to encourage the affordable housing that we knew we needed and that was mandated for these developments, but then to mitigate the difficulty of delivering that by supplying the water for the affordable housing. So really, again, evidencing some very nuanced approaches to the carrot and stick approach of how you manage water. So I don't want folks to forget that part of the story, because I think it's one to be very proud of. Then, as I warned you earlier, I think the city and the county water system have done incredible work. I think the public can trust those hardworking folks that agree to do this hard work at the city. In the private sector, I represent developers and utilities and water, irrigation districts and irrigators and farms around Santa Fe. And I think it's very important to remember that Santa Fe, the city and county water systems with the watershed, the well field, and the connection to the Rio Grande, we produce that water in a landscape that has other utilities, El Dorado, other communities, Rio Rancho, Tesuque, other places to the north, and then a lot of domestic wells. And so it's important to remember that there is a larger water balance out there that supports all of the humans and all of the environment and all of the farming and the beautiful landscape that we all enjoy. And so that's maybe a little broader, Michael, than you wanted the conversation to go, but I do think it's important to make sure folks are aware of that. And it doesn't diminish the great story of the city and county water utility, but it does put it in some context.
No, I think that is excellent, and I just want to say myth busted. Like, I don't want to hear it anymore. I know I'm going to still hear it, but myth busted. So, all right. Joseph, did you have something you wanted to add?
I just wanted to add, in fact, I think it's just, generally speaking, new development is far more efficient about its water use than older developments, because as has been pointed out, we have become better and better and better in terms of the efficiency and use of our waters. And that goes down to our development codes in terms of how we use water and the use of water per unit. And one of the reasons why we've been able to lower it is because we put restrictions, very good restrictions in terms of the per unit uses of water. And so when we put in new development, it's actually a lot more efficient than stuff that was built years and years ago. And so it's important to note that when we're doing new development, it's actually a benefit relative to water than a detriment.
The same is true on energy, right? The new development is more energy efficient, and then denser development is more energy efficient. All of that's true. What's so frustrating to me is that we seemingly have a whole bunch of people in Santa Fe who are in the comment section in the New Mexican, and anytime there's a public hearing, do we have enough water for this? They're so concerned about water budget. The flip side is even more horrifying. I don't know why people aren't concerned about our carbon budget, because if we push development further and further away,
Right.
in terms of sprawl, or to Rio Rancho or to Albuquerque, we are causing massive emissions that are the end of the world, literally. And I mean, there's an article today in the Guardian that the emissions of 3 Americans are enough to kill a person, and just in terms of a metric of the social cost of carbon emissions. The idea that we focus on this one thing that we think we know, and it's totally false, and not kind of think about the cost that's associated with not doing better and smarter development is kind of horrifying.
And I think one other subtle point in terms of maybe the difference between affordable housing and general development from a water perspective is that we are taking the first step towards sort of recycling our water. And that generally affordable or high density housing is going to use less water outside. And so when you fast forward out hundreds of years, ultimately the lifeline for cities is going to be an ability to use most of the water inside and in some fashion recycle or return that water back to the system. And so there is a difference between an affordable housing unit that doesn't use much water outside or only uses water off the roof to a larger house that has mature landscaping outside.
Right. All right. Myth busted. I love it. I love that I get to say that. I love that we just busted it. It's been busted before, but here we are busting it again. All right. Next one. Affordable housing looks cheap and ugly. So I'm going to go to Anthony for this, but I want to hear from everybody because I think everyone probably has some excellent opinions about this. The reality is that builders of affordable housing have to comply with all the same restrictions, okay, on design and construction standards, right, as market rate projects. And more than that, because affordable housing projects usually rely on some public money, they have to comply with additional restrictions and then usually higher standard rate housing. So the reality is that affordable housing is affordable because public and private funds go into it, making it less costly to live in, not because it's lower quality construction or anything. But we still have a lot of people complaining about how ugly current or proposed developments are and that they ruin a community or city aesthetic. We get that a lot in Santa Fe. In Santa Fe, that aesthetic is an Adobe look called Pueblo Revival that's mostly famous for its distinct architectural style. I mean, it combines elements of indigenous Pueblo architecture and then like Spanish missions. So mostly it's a bunch of low brown buildings with smooth edges. But it also limits what and how we can build in Santa Fe. So for example, buildings in the city's historic districts have to follow a bunch of design guidelines so they conform with the aesthetic. And so this is something that nearly all cities have to deal with. People preventing affordable housing development because it isn't pretty enough or doesn't look like an Adobe knockoff. Strict adherence to these kinds of aesthetics has been tied to, in a lot of cases, the cultural identity of the community. But for me, that begs the question, is a community's culture minimized to a design aesthetic? And can something as big as the culture of a community be encapsulated and then preserved in a design aesthetic? And more than that, is ours as New Mexicans a culture that allows a poor representation of that culture of a people to stand in the way of having them safely and affordably housed? Anthony, I'm looking at you. Can you speak to this? The myth.
I can speak to this. How long? There's a lot to go. There's a lot to unpack there. And thank you for the setup for this discussion. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, affordable housing is expensive, right? I mean, all construction is expensive, and affordable housing, because it has these extra restrictions on it, that is probably doubly the case. The issue of the restrictions that we put on buildings in Santa Fe, not only in our historic districts, and I sit on the H board here in town, but in terms of our points guides and other kind of limitations that we put on new development in Santa Fe, certainly are yet another limiting factor in terms of producing good quality, attractive, affordable housing. And this is an area where we do need innovation in design, where we do need innovation in materials, and we do need innovation in choice. And we have rules that are set up against that from happening here in Santa Fe, which is a big problem. The broader discussion about whether a local culture is strengthened or reinforced by its style guidelines, that's a discussion for another day. I think our style guidelines in Santa Fe are really doing us in, and I talk about that a lot, at least on H board, week in, week out. I think though, for me, and Friends of Architecture recently did a housing discussion on this, and it's on YouTube. But we talked about it from a lot of different angles: the kind of regulatory angle, the developer angle, the design angle, and the equity angle in terms of housing. One of the things that I see as kind of fighting the production of quality affordable housing is this kind of neighborhood or community process that we have. The Zia Station discussion recently for the proposal for a 3-story tall transit-oriented development out in St. Francis at Zia Station, kind of was emblematic of what we're doing as a community to shoot ourselves in the foot. I really feel like, the more that communities come out and say, well, make it less tall. Let's do, 2 stories instead of 3. Let's do fewer units. Let's provide more parking. Especially in a place where we should have dense, people who commute to work using a rail line that's right there, is fighting against the very things that we want. I think another approach, instead of kind of dumbing things down or watering things down and asking developers to do less, is to come at it with a different approach, to say, like, please do more, build 5 stories, build 7 stories, and make and exceed our desired number of affordable units in that development. We're going to give you the opportunity to increase your height, and in exchange for that, why don't you give us a net zero building or a net zero water building, or why don't you give us a park? We'll lower your cost by saying we're going to lower the parking requirements to encourage people to use transit and develop those things, and you can build more. That kind of deal making where we say, okay, well, we need the market to produce housing in some fashion. And if we as a community say, like, we have priorities and we have values and goals about sustainability, about density, about walkability, and all of this stuff, that's how you make it happen. You strike these deals. I think we're doing the opposite in most cases when we review development.
What is the rest
That's why we don't have nice things.
That's all you had to say, Anthony? All right. Joseph, what do you got?
Yeah, I think a couple points. So, and I love what Anthony's framework, because I think it's absolutely true. One of the issues is that within both the cities and counties inclusionary zoning programs, right? You by design, you're not allowed to show any difference, right? It has to be the ordinance itself by design mixes up the affordable housing is where they are. By design, it makes sure that both the structure and the quality of the facades and things like that are identical. So you can't tell the difference. And when those were created, that was put in just for those purposes, so that the affordable units within the inclusionary zoning couldn't be seen from anything else, and therefore it was a little harder to pick on somebody's fence, right? Which has happened, right? Those kind of things have happened. And so I want to put that's a small percentage of the affordable units that are going on. But also I think it's important to remember that design as a rule, and in terms of densities, we were actually doing fairly good after the 1940s in terms of our allocation and building of affordable housing. And if we had kept to those same kind of standards, i.e. not adopting land use codes that were foreign to this particular area, and design processes, we'd probably still be a lot of decisions. We'd have the ability to continue to divide our lots to very little tiny small lots, or build 4 or 5 houses on one pieces of property where it was allowed. And we wouldn't have these artificial kind of things about not allowing natural densities to happen. So if you look at the core areas of the city that were built before the 40s, you'll find that those are the most dense parts of the city. Now, they are no longer affordable because they're attractive, right? So it's so funny when it says, one of the reasons why they're so attractive is because they're pedestrian oriented, right? They have facades that meld together. So even if there is a few folks left, right, from the old neighborhood, as I call, that are still living there, you can't tell the differentiation between incomes, right? It's a monolithic structures. And I think that is kind of something that we've just completely forgot. And it's really, really hard to get to that theory of building and design where we can grow a lot more naturally, a lot more densely, and quite frankly, housing our neighbors versus pointing fingers as I'm telling and saying, we don't want you here. Because you're housing your brother and your sister-in-law. You might not like your sister-in-law, but you're gonna house them anyway. And so, that kind of both familiar design program and, hell, I'm gonna sell that lot to that guy over there, and it's gonna be a nice little tiny home. And he's gonna subdivide it later on too. And that's okay. And it should be continued to be okay. And I think we just forgot how to do that.
Right. And I think there's like, this link that's been made between culture and aesthetic is just it seems dangerous, and it seems like it really belongs more in the realm of a discussion about values, what are the community's values and how do those translate into a design aesthetic. And if for some reason a need for something that needs to be healed in the community, calls for something else, should that keep you from helping your community? You know, I don't know. Anyway, I feel like it just belongs in a totally different discussion realm. But before we move on, oh, Anthony.
I was just gonna say, we have a historic ordinance that explicitly points to tourism and property values as its express goal. And in that regard, it was successful for doing that. That those were values and priorities that this city set at a particular point in time. It's had costs in terms of equity, in terms of representation, in terms of preservation.
But I mean, I guess I'd even have to go back there and ask, like, so the city decided that, like, who was the city, like, and what did that, like, public engagement look like? Like, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. All of that's problematic. But I'm saying, if we really believe in housing for all, if we really believe in greater measures of sustainability, if we really believe in diversity in our community, then, why wouldn't we have a similarly powerful ordinance that would shape the built environment in the way that this 1959 ordinance has done in Santa Fe and continues to do. It's a question of values being out of whack. I agree with that sentiment.
All right. Jesse, Kate, Kyle, you want to add anything? All right. So the next myth that I want to tackle is kind of
did we bust that one? Are we okay on that one? Did we bust that one?
Oh yeah, we did. We totally busted that myth. Thank you everyone for helping me bust that myth, and thank you, Joseph, for making sure that we busted. All right.
And truly, one Google search, I mean, there's some good links in the chat, but one Google search on that will bust that myth.
Right. I mean, this is what I'm saying. So the next myth is kind of like a collection of things, but they're all super related. And I'm going to go to you for this, Joseph. And I kind of have a lot to say on this one. So, okay, here they are. Affordable housing is a burden on taxpayers and municipalities. That's okay. Affordable housing is just another government handout.
No.
Affordable housing only benefits the very poor and everyone else pays. So, all right. Yeah, exactly. False. Reality, affordable housing actually enhances local tax revenues. I don't know if you know how that works, but that's what it does. By improving or replacing substandard housing, affordable housing becomes a net plus on the tax roll. So instead of low or no payment of taxes by distressed properties, affordable housing owners actively contribute to the local economy and the taxes they pay. The money they spend in local businesses, which is really important, and in how they increase property values and revenue in a neighborhood. And it isn't low income families or individuals who benefit the most from federal housing subsidies, all right? It's wealthy homeowners. Homeowners receive tax deductions for mortgage interest and a similar write-off for property taxes that are paid. And according to the Department of Housing and Urban Development in 2003, those subsidies cost the federal government $87.8 billion, while building and subsidizing affordable housing only costs $41.5. So when you factor in improvements in property values, increases in taxes paid by stable employment and enhanced revenues from a better educated populace, affordable housing actually provides a net gain to governments at every level. So that's that. And then, so some of the people that are impacted, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, that are impacted by a lack of affordable housing include employers, seniors, low-income people, immigrants, low-wage or entry-level workers, firefighters, police officers, military personnel, teachers. So a lack of affordable housing means tax revenues are not in place to improve roads, schools, or air quality. It means businesses struggle to retain qualified workers and lowers the amount of money available to spend in those businesses. So here's the thing. Affordable housing isn't just about doing something to help others that need it. Although I can understand why this isn't enough of a reason to do something about it. But it is about improving our economy, raising the standards of working and middle-class families, and building an equitable and sustainable future. So that's what I have to say about that. Joseph, I'm gonna go.
Great.
a lot to say about.
Well, so absolutely true about just the net effects in terms of household income. And if you can hold that household income in Santa Fe versus in Rio Rancho or versus in Albuquerque, by design, both the city of Santa Fe and the county of Santa Fe are losing huge amounts of revenue, right? 60% of our population that works here is living someplace else. We, by design, are pushing people out that should be eating here, that should be investing in their community here. And instead, they're doing it someplace else. So we're paying them to subsidize Rio Rancho. I think more importantly, just as a structural element in itself, most people don't understand that for the most part, development is a money loser for cities and counties, right? And so the city taxpayer for all development. But the worst place that we subsidize the most is for low density sprawl development, i.e. big homes with things of that nature. So, and the reason you say this, say for instance, you have a pipe and it costs $2 million to produce this linear pipe, but it only supports 10 houses, right? We'll never get our money back, whether it's in property taxes or in sales tax of the house. House of the government will never get its money back. However, if you have 50 units or 100 units, you're going to get you're going to come a lot closer to the difference between what it costs to not only put in that infrastructure in the first place and to maintain it. And that's valid with all forms of infrastructure, whether it be broadband, right, which are all in need of, water, sewer. And so it's a lot more efficient to serve a lot more people in a high density environment. And the reason why we talked about density in this context is because when you have one of the functions of why we're so unaffordable is because the cost of land, right? So if you just compare the cost of land that we have on a square footage basis to almost every place else in the state, although Albuquerque is catching up with us. I mean, they're only a few percentage points below us right now. The big factor is when you're doing development is you have to pay for that land. And so the more units you can put on it, the more affordable it can be. And so, and it doesn't mean that developers are making some huge sums of money or any money at all in some cases, but it does mean, at least for the government itself, at some point in time, they may be able to get at least a substantial portion of their funds back by the investment of how it takes long to maintain it. Because once a developer builds a sewer line or a water line, they provide it to the city to be able to maintain for the rest of the time it's there. And so maintenance costs, if you're having to maintain a 200-year-old water line and you're only serving 5 people, that becomes really problematic. So there's whole areas of the city, right, that are zoned for 1 unit per acre, right, which is just a ridiculous way for us to be able to subsidize the wealthy. And as you'd mentioned, we're also subsidizing the wealthy relative to federal tax programs, right? So usually it's a 2-to-1 ratio. So no matter how much, what we've seen is anytime there's been a bump up in terms of federal subsidies for lower moderate income households, the subsidies for very high income households actually increases even more, right? So i.e. the tax deductions and things of that nature that we can take off our taxes if we're so lucky to have a home are far more greater debt to the federal government than what is provided for low and moderate income people.
You're on mute, Michael.
I see I'm on mute. But I said, in case you didn't guess, busted. So we're like, I think I need to have a part 2 for this topic. But I have to get to questions. And before I do, though, just really, really quickly, and this will be quick because I wasn't able to get a realtor on our panel today. But the last myth that I wanted to cover, because I mentioned it a bunch of times, was that affordable housing drives down property values. The reality was that repeated research shows affordable housing has no negative impact on home prices or on the speed of frequency of sale of neighboring homes. According to the National Low Income Housing Coalition, I trust them, 85% of affordable housing meets or exceeds federal quality standards, and over 40% of this housing is considered excellent. And that means affordable housing is probably on par with its surrounding neighborhood or in even better condition than its neighbors. So there's that. We will have to have a part 2 to this, and I just want to quickly open it up to questions. If there are any questions, I would love to hear from the audience. All you need to do is raise your hand and we can gets you. So I think we do have someone. Let's see. Rebecca, I believe, would like to say something. Rebecca, you are on.
I am always on. Guys, this was great. Thank you. What about ADUs as one of the solution to density on the east side of town or larger lots to try to promote a program? We tried it, Peter Ives introduced something and it went from 2 to 1. But to take a serious look about that alternative again, it seems to me that that might be one way to start to neighborhood by neighborhood affect all the issues surrounding that you've discussed, including inequity and lack of diversity and et cetera, et cetera. So any views on, even though it's a micro task, probably Joseph, as opposed to a big picture, what role might that play?
So the city of Santa Fe has actually done, just recently passed a new ordinance to be able to help support increased use of accessory dwelling units. So I think that's a step in the right direction. At the end of the day, though, so say for you have whole neighborhoods that really do have 1 unit per acre. If one large house and 3/4 of an acre surrounding them, and if you're putting one accessory dwelling unit, that'd be nice because it doubles the density, but you're still getting only 2 units per acre. So I think if you follow that with that, though, why not have 2 or 3 ADUs if possible to be able to put on those things? And then you're starting to get to what we would call, traditional compound, which is what we did in the past to support affordable housing. That's how we helped our neighbors and our families live among us. We just kept building either another unit on our house or 10 feet away. And so that would be a natural progressive way of doing it. In order to achieve that, though, you have to just say you have to decrease or increase the overall densities from something that doesn't allow for that to happen.
Well, Joseph, yeah, you would have to do that. And the on ADU, I can now build, as we've discussed, a 1,500 square foot house on my property. I would like to build to 750. It's again to move the needle so that we could start to look at how you densify area neighborhood by neighborhood. Maybe many people will take it, but definitely having a 1 ADU is not going to solve it at all.
I think what you're talking about is upzoning, right? And I think that's a kind of more radical proposal. I think certainly ADU has its place as one of many valves that we can use to address housing. It's not without its risks. It has the potential to put a lot of units on Airbnb in a tourist town like Santa Fe and not put them into the hands of affordable rentals. It has the risk of providing only the opportunities of development and increasing property value to people who already have wealth and own property, without rules that or even
Anthony, it would have to have a restriction, okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
You would do this, but you had to rent it to as an affordable unit. It's not another money only for the rich.
Absolutely, but it'd be nice to also provide that opportunity for low-income homeowners, right? How do we grease the wheels at building and safety to kind of streamline permitting processes and get the ability to kind of affordably create these ADUs in lower income communities where people own homes. But Rebecca, I think your point is great. I don't want 1, I want 2, or I want 3. And a more radical proposal in some cities have done this. Minneapolis is one of them. Is ending single family zoning entirely.
Yes, amen. And take a really big look at that. I mean, I hope at your next conversation you can again. Let's take a look at Midtown one more time without a listening session. Excuse me. But something that says, we've got this land, we could get money for infrastructure. How about we take half of it and turn it to housing?
I love it.
How about it?
Right.
I mean, I'd love to hear, not another listening session, but some concrete ideas. Okay, we can't do all of it. Can we do 25% of it? Could we just get some designers and do a charrette, and figure it out, and then give the land away? Say, you know, RFP, the land's free, give us your proposal. And
That's
then
the message.
they'll-
Figure it
they'll
out.
get infrastructure
So,
funding.
all right, everyone, we got
I'd
to
love to
wrap
hear
it up
that.
tonight. I want to thank everyone for joining, especially our panelists. Some of you had to leave, but thank you all for being here. And I'm very much looking forward to dispelling and busting some more myths in the future. Again, visit us on YouTube and share far and wide. Enjoy your evening, everyone. We'll see you next month.